Welcome to Implement This with Microsoft Business Solutions MVP Britta Rexted and co-host Matthew C. Anderson, where we have an insider's discussion around the things we consider when implementing Dynamics 365. Today's episode is sponsored by Enagic, a leading Microsoft Gold Dynamics CRM ISV delivering best-in-class Dynamics 365 customer engagement solutions, as well as cost-effective and high-quality offshore Dynamics CRM programming services. Enagic's innovative solutions portfolio includes Maplytics, a premier map visualization, routing, and geoanalytics app for Dynamics 365 customer engagement, InnoLink that offers a seamless integration between QuickBooks and Dynamics 365 customer engagement, and other productivity apps like User Adoption Monitor, Click to Clone, and Click to Export. We thank Enagic for their sponsorship of today's show. Hi, Britta. How are you?
Good. Matt, how are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I'm once again excited to be sitting down and recording an episode of Implement This.
Me too.
So it's funny the way now that this has been top of mind, it feels like now whenever I run across a topic, I start asking myself the question like, is that going to be a show topic?
Mm-hmm. I think I even heard you say that out loud this week.
Yeah, very, very true. But I digress. Even before we get into it, just want to thank people for the response, both through social media, reaching out to us through the website, through our email address. We'll chat a little bit more about this later, but just kind of hearing feedback from all of you out there is great and very humbling that it's come so quickly. So thank you very much. So digging into the show topic that we have for today, as mentioned a little bit ago, there was one of those moments of, well, this is probably a show topic, huh?
Uh-huh.
And specifically this time it was around Microsoft Dynamics plus Microsoft Flow.
Very exciting topic. I think it's something that we all have heard the terms, and we even have ideas of what it probably does, or fears about what it doesn't do. Mm-hmm. Unless you actually dig in and start using it, I think it's really hard to discern that it's kind of, by nature, an ambiguous tool, because there's so many things you can do with it. It's supposed to be so flexible, and that sometimes makes it a little harder to wrap your head around what it's actually for.
Yeah, and I know that while I don't consider myself to be the deepest expert in using Flow, I have used it in a few different situations with Dynamics. I was actually quite surprised when we got as long-winded into a topic as we did before. So, maybe we can recreate some of that lightning in a bottle that we had spur of the moment before, kind of recover some of that, because it was a great discussion, I thought.
Yeah, absolutely. So something that I loved about the conversation was Matt and I, and a couple people that we work with, and we were talking about the value of Flow, and specifically as consultants, what is our role in using Flow? What is our role in advising customers in using Flow? What are customers doing for themselves? What are we afraid of customers doing for themselves? Maybe they're getting themselves into trouble and we're going to have to bail them out. And so it was really, really interesting and just really great kind of conversation, a little bit of debate. I loved it. So hopefully we can bring some of the finer points of that back into this conversation today.
Most definitely. And I think just for the sake of making sure we have a collective starting point for the audience, we should start with what is Flow, or what's the basic value proposition of Flow? So what do you know as a starting point?
So what I really love about Flow is it's kind of this spiderweb. I kind of think of it as like a spiderweb between all these other cloud applications and CRM. It's actually not a CRM tool. It just happens to integrate really well with CRM. And so we can use it for example, interacting with Twitter or with MailChimp, or with some other tool that we're using. And so it's really exciting because, my world, I've always been kind of obsessed with CRM workflows, but in a workflow, unless I start writing code, I'm always trapped inside of CRM. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times my data, or what's happening to my data real time, isn't inside CRM yet. And so Flow is that opportunity to interact with CRM, but to actually interact with your bigger kind of cloud instance around CRM too.
Yeah.
Really exciting.
You'd mentioned in there a few different popular cloud services, an example being Twitter, but that's one of the foundational aspects of Flow is there are a number of connectors for third-party products. There's over 100 that are listed out on the Flow website that are generally available. Some of them are kind of free to use. Some of them have you require a certain plan to be able to use them. I'm sure we'll have a chat a little bit about that as we go through this here. But you don't have to custom develop every single connector to those third-party services.
Mm-hmm. And I think the list just continues to grow. I don't know at what rate it's growing, but it seems fast.
Yeah.
So it's nice that those tools are continuing to progress. And then as this Microsoft Marketplace is really taking off in ways that third parties are able to create tools available to us for purchase, there's even some cool things within that marketplace that we can, pay to have some really, really cool tools we would have otherwise.
Yeah, and just for sake of comparison, Microsoft Flow is very similar to some other services that are out there that are non-Microsoft offerings. I know that I'd worked with both Zapier, or some people call it Zapier, and If This, Then That, as other popular kind of automation tools in the same vein as Flow. And there are always going to be benefits or drawbacks to one versus the other. A couple of the things for me that have been exciting for Flow versus the others are it is included with some of the Microsoft 365 components that are out there. It's kind of a native part of those that can hook into understanding who you are as someone logged into the Microsoft Online portal and to the connected services there, in addition to having these connectors to all the standard third-party apps. And I think maybe that brings us into an important early on point is the connector for Microsoft Flow that is Dynamics 365 in the Flow user interface itself is targeted toward a Dynamics 365 online customer. The on-premise world maybe not seeing as much love for this one in particular.
And that's something that I think it's a little bit of a push and pull back and forth with every cool new shiny thing that comes out. It's that question of, are we going to get it for on-prem? Does it really fit on-prem? And is that actually a good play for it? This is very much a cloud tool. And so it kind of makes sense to me. It's a bummer because I tend to play more in the on-premise space. And so there'll definitely be CRM projects that I don't get to use this on, at least not in its current state. But it also kind of makes sense that it's very much a Microsoft Cloud tool. So I kind of get it.
Yeah, and I can already hear somebody just talking out loud with their earbuds in at the podcast saying, well, but you can get to on-premise data using Flow with an on-premise SQL connector, which piece you can do that kind of thing. But obviously with working with Dynamics, making like direct SQL updates is not a supported operation. So if you're kind of watching for things to happen in CRM, you could use it that way with the SQL database, but not necessarily the intent of the product.
It's kind of the age-old, well, you could do it in code. Well, yeah, you could probably do just about anything in code. It's not really the point of Flow, though. I mean, it's designed as a citizen developer, is the term that Microsoft often uses, which I hear as that tech-savvy person, the person you and I were, Matt, when we were customers. The person that I know I was as an admin, where I wanted to push things as far as I possibly could within my own skill set without bringing in a developer, without spending more budget, without getting stuff approved. Just needing kind of my own ability to learn it and leverage community resources and go build what my company needed. That's really the target audience of this tool. It's not trying to replace heavy dev. It's not going up against Scribe or one of those powerlifting kind of tools. It's really designed for the business user, the business analyst, the system admin, the power user, the really, really savvy, smart sales guy who's doing Power BI off their watch. It's that kind of audience. And so those kinds of people are not going to be writing some kind of intense connector to SQL. That's just not the audience.
Yeah. Well, and I think this brings up both the conversation around the kind of custom development side of it, as well as tools like a Scribe for being able to do similar types of interactions with the platform. And there are also going to be third-party ISVs that directly connect to some of these other services. And I think depending on your scenario, if there is a good fit for one of these other tools, the intent of Flow is not, well, let's reinvent the wheel and do it with Flow instead of one of these other more purpose-built types of tools, but instead trying to capture those things that come up through a Power Business user saying, I want to be able to do this, but I can't go get budget to be able to get a developer to do this or to go justify building this out based on our starting point, our small use case. This could be that thing that helps you put together the justification. Look what we were able to do using Flow, and now let's take that and evaluate whether that's going to be robust enough for doing on a wider scale than what we have right now, or maybe looking at something like Power Apps, not Power Apps, rather Logic Apps, as the extension of that, without recognizing we are not developers ourselves, but sitting behind every Flow is the Logic Apps tool set from Microsoft that really allows that next level deep as far as robustness and how you can build these out and really tailor how that flow of information is going to go. Flow is the citizen developer side. Logic Apps is going to be more the true developer side that would interact with it.
I think it solves, in all things, it's best to learn at solving small problems. Solve the little annoyances because you learn it really well. Don't go solve the huge thing saying, well, instead of spending thousands of dollars on this code, we're going to write a huge flow. No, find the thing that every time you get said email, you've got to go hand key a bunch of data, or every time something happens, particular thing happens on Twitter, there's some interaction between your email campaign service and CRM. Places that people are duplicating effort. Those are great pieces for Flow and fairly straightforward versus reinventing the wheel or trying to cannibalize what's working well somewhere else. What I'm really excited about is I think a lot of times, and I've done this way too many times, we get so hooked on CRM that we use CRM for things we shouldn't really use CRM for, and we try so hard to do something that it really wasn't meant to do. For example, CRM is not designed to be used as a bookkeeping, like a transaction kind of accounting software. I've used it for that. It's just not really what it's for. And so Flow lets us use the right tool for the right job and then connect the right tool into CRM. So we get the piece of data that we need without over-architecting CRM into something it really wasn't designed to do well. And I think this is going to open that up to business users or savvy companies who want to use the tool that they have. Yeah, it's really exciting.
Yeah, and one last piece on getting started with it is that Flow uses a concept of a recipe or a template that you can start with. So you don't necessarily have to start with that blank screen, blank piece of paper in front of you of what might I build out. There are common starting points that you can use that have been submitted both by Microsoft and by other people in the community. I know an example that I've chatted about on another podcast that I do around a simple flow was I have a Dynamics 365 account, user account that I log in with. I have tasks that are getting assigned to me. Whenever I'm assigned a task in Dynamics, go and create that in Wunderlist, because Wunderlist is where I run all my tasks from. And a very, very simplistic example of being able to use Flow as a simple way to have those move into the place where I'm more familiar with or comfortable with working in Wunderlist as far as task management. Spoiler alert for anybody who's out there in trying to use Dynamics as their primary task list compared to more specific apps for that. There are some challenges that you're going to run into in doing that. I mean, it's, again, right tool for the job question.
Absolutely.
Cool. So kind of looking at one of the early questions that came up in our previous discussion is kind of that flow versus CRM workflow.
Ooh, I love this debate.
Yeah. And this is not a debate that is only happening in our previous discussion or this conversation here. I will give a nod to the tip of the day, CRM tip of the day blog, where there's been some kind of expounding on flow versus CRM workflow. So, Britta, what is your kind of starting point as you're thinking about this? Do you pick one or the other?
Well, first of all, I come to the table with an incredible bias towards out-of-the-box CRM workflow, because that is what derailed my career and landed me here, was probably CRM workflow. So I have a strong bias there. And I do think there's a lot of elegance in the workflow that I'm not seeing yet in Flow. There are things that I really like in workflow. There's security control that I have in workflows that I don't yet have in Flow. And it's really designed for me to roll it out to the entire organization or do things at a system level that I don't feel Flow is really designed for that audience quite yet. So something that I'm a little nervous is I'm seeing people do really complicated flows to accomplish things that a 3-step workflow can get done. So if everything happens inside CRM, I don't feel like Flow is the right tool for the job. My favorite scenario is where you do what you can't do inside CRM, so what's using an outside app, something outside out in your cloud, do that in Flow, pass it to CRM, whether that's creating a record or updating something, triggering the workflow, and then have the workflow do what it does really, really well, and then maybe even it kicks something out the back end, and then Flow picks it up and runs with it. So I think they can work together as a team really well. I have not seen... I don't agree with the debate that Flow is replacing workflow. Yeah. Part of that is I'm incredibly biased, so it's going to be really hard to talk me out of using workflows. But you can use both, and they can play well together. Yeah. What's your thought?
Well, so everything you said, but I mean, there are just things that the CRM workflow engine or Dynamics workflow engine is intended to do. I mean, the concept of a real-time workflow or synchronous workflow is not something that you get with Microsoft Flow. That Flow is always going to run asynchronously. So, I mean, there are considerations around that as far as, hey, if you're using a workflow to be able to name records and you want it to show up there right away, you're going to want to continue to use, say, the workflow engine inside of CRM versus trying to do that with a Flow. Not to get too deep into it, but especially when you start considering how often workflows are running, there's this potential of running into limits on how many flows you can run per month based on the level of subscription that you have. I think we can talk a little bit later about licensing. I don't want to sidetrack in it now, but if you have something that's going to run, hundreds of times a day, maybe thousands of times a day, depending on how many transactions that is, that can become a cost consideration using Microsoft Flow. Whereas if you're using the Dynamics 365 workflow engine, you're not paying incrementally for that.
That's a really good point. And my argument there would be, if you're truly comparing if you can do the whole thing in Flow or the whole thing in Workflow, you probably should be doing it in Workflow. That's my very biased statement on it.
Well, and it's interesting as we look, it's obviously been made public that Microsoft has intentions of having Flow be able to run natively from Dynamics 365 in the version 9 update of Dynamics 365. So there is this at least intention that we can see based on publicly viewable preview content out there that Flow is going to be one step closer within Dynamics being able to execute it natively from the customer engagement platform versus having to just have it sit outside in Flow as far as how you begin that journey or interact with it. So I think, obviously preview right now, so a lot of that could be speculation of exactly how it's going to be until things come out from under NDA, but or just truly materialize for us to be able to get our hands on and put through the paces.
It'll be interesting to see how that plays into security modeling and all of that, because right now we do not have much of this. That was part of our larger conversation around Flow, really got into security. How do you control at a granular level who can write flows, who can change flows, what can you do, what can you get away with in a flow? Something that I love about CRM workflows is I can't accidentally give the user something that I didn't give them in security. So if they can't create opportunities, for example, I guess we're getting into the weeds here. There's ways you can do it. But there's some natural protections in there in security helping me maintain my own security model I told it I wanted it to be. And I get nervous with Flow that I'm both letting my curious users run around and maybe do things that I don't want. There's a governance piece here, definitely. I think there's potentially a data integrity discussion. I mean, what are you seeing in security conversations? Because we know it's not CRM security yet. Flow security is different than CRM security, and we don't know what it will be when it's someday in Dynamics.
Yeah, so there are a couple of things as far as the security model between Flow and Dynamics. So when you are using the connector to Dynamics 365, to be able to make that connection, it does require Dynamics credentials to be able to get in there. So you will be authenticated against some Dynamics user for the context in which this flow is going to be running. So there are kind of some protections that you get there where if you have a user who has access to create their own flow and they try to do an operation in Dynamics that they otherwise wouldn't have access to, it looks at the user they're logged in as to see if they can physically do the thing that they're trying to do.
That's good.
For part of that. Now, that being said, there are certain expectations that we have in the world of Dynamics where sometimes to do things in bulk, it is a real big hassle. You know, as we've talked about in previous episodes, there are different ways to interact with things on a larger scale and in mass. And Flow opens up some other opportunities for people to, no pun intended there, but other ways in which people can interact with records on a grand scale and potentially really do some damage if they're making updates. You know, they could create a flow that goes into every, a bunch of opportunities, a list of opportunities, and cycles through them and changes the name of those opportunities. And if they have permissions to be able to modify the opportunity record in that particular field, and you don't have field level security preventing them from doing it, they could get through there using Flow. I mean, let's hope we don't have to guard against every single potential like that, but it is a consideration when you start looking at the security model of Flow.
So what is my opportunity then as a nervous admin who says, okay, so maybe a couple of you are going to go play with this, and maybe that could be a good idea, maybe, I don't know. And then most of you I don't trust at all. Because to be honest, there's always those users that you just don't trust with certain permissions. What ability as an admin or as a consultant do you even have to lock that down? Right.
So I'll start, and this goes a little bit into licensing, but as part of assigning a Dynamics 365 license to a user, there is an additional option of being able to assign a Dynamics 365 Flow license to them as part of their Dynamics 365 plan. There are several different versions of the Microsoft Flow plans: free, Flow for Dynamics 365, Plan 1, and Plan 2. And those are all within Flow, and the confusing thing is that somebody could interact with Dynamics using any of those 4 plans. So if you enable somebody with a Microsoft Flow license of any type, they do have some capability to be able to connect to Dynamics using the Dynamics connector in Microsoft Flow. So there's like an on-off toggle of every single potential Flow license that they could have. If you really don't want them out there, best to turn that off, not give them the option for that. Each of those plans, free, Flow for Dynamics 365, Plan 1 and Plan 2, have progressively more capability associated with each of them. And it's a little out of the scope of our conversation here to go through what all of those different capabilities are with each of them. But the simple version is kind of in that order, there's progressively more that they can do.
So am I right then that it's pretty much it's a binary on-off? I'm either giving you the ability to create and or run flows, or I'm not giving you anything as far as it relates to dynamics.
That's right. I mean, the only nuance that I would add in there is, like, let's say I'm an admin of a Dynamics instance and I create a flow that doesn't use any specific user context. It's looking for stuff that any user of CRM might be doing. Something you do as a user, even if you don't have access to Flow could see that, record that was created or that change that was made and execute based on that. So you still have to think through some of those types of things, but you can protect people from themselves as an admin.
Got it. So in that case, it's running as you. So
Correct.
You as the admin are writing the flow. You can do things in the flow that you as the admin can do.
Right.
So if you turn it off for all your users, you can still benefit from Flow in your organization. You can hook up to, outside resources and MailChimp and whatever it is you want to do. But if you don't want to give, the accounting department Flow because you don't feel like they need it, you could just toggle that all the way off.
Yep, and I suspect this is going to be one of those areas where, as people are using Flow more and more often in the wild, I mean, I think we're starting to see people who are using it in different cases, but we haven't seen that explosion yet, or at least I haven't seen that explosion yet. But we will be finding a lot of those best practices out as we kind of get there. And I think the updates that Flow has, being able to natively be called from Dynamics 365 with the 9.0 update, I mean, I think that's going to be a tipping point for a lot of implementations that we work with, where we're really going to have to pay attention to this now.
So something that I'm kind of nervous about, thinking about it from a consulting perspective, is if I'm coming on a project and someone potentially has written flows, may or may not be with the company anymore, all of a sudden there's this whole can of worms. If we're in CRM, I can see all the processes that have been written in that CRM. I can tell who wrote them and what they're running, and I can even go look at system jobs and see if they're running all the time. Do I like the way they're written? Are they maybe doing something that's causing unintentional consequences? I have a lot of visibility. I get kind of nervous that there's just people out there making these things, and maybe I'm paranoid. But if you're coming in, let's say you're new, you're new to an existing project, is there even a way to go see what flows are out there?
So there's some capability over that if you are an admin with Flow Plan 2, and that's an Office 365 admin with Flow Plan 2. You can view usage of flows across the company. You can establish policies. You can get some of this aggregate information of how Flow is being used. And there's still, as I've looked into it, some granularity that I would like to have that's maybe still going to be coming soon, but isn't there today. So I think there is some level of being able to investigate that, but I think you also need to rely on good old-fashioned asking questions, asking around, seeing if it's something that is in use there.
Okay, yeah. So it's more of a manual governance from a business side. It's not necessarily something as an admin I can just go in and see. It kind of feels like that whole, someone creates a bunch of views and shares them with people, and then all of a sudden someone's calling you as the admin, hey, can you update that view that Frank made for me? It's like, I have no visibility into what that is.
Right.
It feels like it could be one of those situations, only automation can be a runaway freight train sometimes.
A little bit.
A little bit.
So, kind of using that as a kind of a question, is it better to do that custom developed integration that we were talking about before versus using Microsoft Flow? I mean, it's not the first time there are external tools that are connecting to Dynamics, right?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of the age-old debate, and I think you can tell very quickly what side someone's coming to the debate from when they're in the conversation. I mean, a developer is going to say no. I mean, a developer is going to want to go develop something. And honestly, I think if you have the budget for it and you have the right developer and you have that skill set, you probably are going to get precisely what it is you're looking for in custom developed. When I was a customer, I never had that opportunity. I was the budget. And so if I could figure it out online how to do it, we had the tool. And if I couldn't figure out how to do it, we didn't have it. And so I think it kind of comes down to that audience. I think it will be, where I think it'll be really interesting to see it play out in the wild is on the big enough projects where you have developers on the project and they are devoting 40 hours a week to writing code. What gets prioritized as a flow and what gets saved for the developers? And that will be really interesting to see. And I think we just have to see enough projects play out where we had that option, where we could have played with flow and we had a full bank of developers to pull from. Otherwise, if you get in a scenario where it's like when you and I were customers, of course we're going to write as many flows as we can because you just don't have a developer. Or you have a developer, but you're going to wait 2 years for the thing you're asking for because you're never going to make the list.
Well, as we consider how a developer kind of fits into this, and if you have those development resources to be able to put toward an integration like this, part of the vision that Microsoft is setting for Flow is that early on, especially at that ground level, that citizen developer type of level, they could create a flow, and with that, as it kind of proves out to have value, that flow can be used as a starting point by a developer for a logic app. And Microsoft Logic Apps is kind of that flow on steroids, that next level of granular control for them to be able to kind of cover a lot of those areas where flow maybe isn't quite as robust as you want to have it be for a kind of an enterprise level integration. A logic app may be a better fit there, or that developer may say, no, this is one where we need to have kind of a direct connection through some other means, and that can be okay. But flow then becomes the starting point for being able to initiate that conversation, whereas it might have been tough to even get those initial requirements down by a user without flow being that kind of paintbrush that they had to get things started.
Or it's a wonderful proof of concept. I mean, it's rare that when you really need to bring a developer in that is a BA, you can develop a proof of concept that actually works end to end and gets the people with the checkbooks excited. And so if you can show something really shiny and then pitch it as something that we really want to turn into a logic app, it's really exciting.
That's right, it is. And a little bit more love for the developers out there. If you are listening to this, even though we're not developer focused, there is a capability within Flow to write custom connectors. So if there are third-party services, or maybe your organization has web services that are exposed, you want to be able to connect to them with a flow, with the right level of flow plan, you can create your own connectors there. So a little love for the dev community too. Don't say we're not thinking about you here at Implement This. So I feel like we've covered an awful lot here, and there's probably people who maybe want to figure out where they could go to learn more about Flow. Do you have any ideas, resources that people could go to?
Well, first of all, you can just go to flow.microsoft.com. Lots of great resources there, and I think it's really inspiring when you go and look at what tools you can plug into. There are things that you can do like today in Flow that you probably wouldn't have thought about doing in Flow. So that's a really good place to start. Lots of great blogs also out on that website, and lots of chatter out in the community. I'd say definitely hit up user group content. There's a lot of excitement around flows there, and I love seeing ways that other organizations have used it. That usually helps me learn if I can see a practical end-to-end example. So that's usually where I go for that kind of thing. Do you have anywhere else that you'd add?
No, I mean, the other thing that I think always comes with the be careful, but roll up your sleeves and give it a try. I mean, there's no way to learn some of these things like seeing where you run into problems and trying to kind of push your way through. So if that's the way you like to learn, Flow is out there. You can create a trial account to be able to interact with Flow just kind of on your own. And a great place to start for the basic building blocks is there is some guided learning from Microsoft on that Flow website, which you'd mentioned, that can help step you through the absolute basics of it.
Nice.
Yeah.
I think it's a really friendly user interface. I mean, there's little gotchas in there, and there's things to learn about the tool, but it is really friendly.
All right. Well, I'm not sure if we quite recreated lightning in a bottle. Perhaps some of the folks we were talking to will listen to the episode, give us feedback, and maybe want to come on in a future episode to talk about all the stuff that we missed from that conversation. So with that, I think we can call this one a wrap.
Sounds good.
All right. Have a good one.
Thanks, Matt.
Bye.
You've been listening to Implement This with Britta Rekstead and Matthew C. Anderson. Do you have a business problem you'd like us to discuss on the show? Reach us through our website, implementthis.org, where you can also subscribe to the podcast. We're on Twitter too. Britta is at MacGyverCRM, and I'm at MC Anderson. Thanks so much for listening.